The Israeli army says it has struck Hamas targets in the Gaza Strip early on Wednesday. The bombings are an apparent retaliation for rockets fired from the Hamas-controlled territory the previous evening. Now, the rockets were launched as Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain signed accords in Washington to normalize diplomatic relations. U.S. President Donald Trump hosting that White House ceremony, placing himself in the role of international peacemaker ahead of elections in November.
We're here this afternoon to change the course of history. After decades of division and conflict, we mark the dawn of a new Middle East. Thanks to the great courage of the leaders of these three countries, we take a major stride toward a future in which people of all faiths and backgrounds live together in peace and prosperity. In Israel's entire history, there have previously been only 2 such agreements. Now we have achieved 2 in a single month, and there are more to follow. Thank you very much. Please.
The decision by the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain to normalize ties with Israel breaks with decades of consensus within the Arab world. A peace deal with the Palestinians has long been upheld as a prerequisite for establishing relations with Israel. Trump and Netanyahu are hopeful, though, that other Arab nations will follow suit, creating a major shift in ties in the region.
And the blessings of the peace we make today will be enormous. First, because this peace will eventually expand to include other Arab states, and ultimately, it can end the Arab-Israeli conflict once and for all.
But the agreements do not address the core conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. Bahrain's foreign minister also made it clear that it was too early to celebrate.
A just, comprehensive, and enduring two-state solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict will be the foundation, the bedrock of such peace.
In the Palestinian territories, the new agreements have been met with anger. Warning sirens sounded as several rockets fired from the Gaza Strip hit Israeli territory. Earlier, hundreds rallied in the occupied West Bank and the Gaza Strip. This agreement today is an agreement that betrays the Palestinian cause and stabs the Palestinian people. And this Emirati-Bahrainian agreement is a withdrawal from the Arab Initiative and the Arab Unison. We say no to normalization, and this normalization is a betrayal to the Palestinian cause and pan-Arabism. Of course, the Palestinian people denounce this agreement. The Palestinian leadership has made it clear that only Israel's withdrawal from the occupied territories can bring peace. But as Israel and Gaza again exchange fire, that seems as far away a goal as ever.
All right, I want to bring in now Rabbi Marc Schneler. He was at the signing ceremony at the White House. Rabbi Schneler is known as the rabbi to the Muslim world. He's a special advisor to King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa of Bahrain. Rabbi Schneler, he joins me on the phone tonight. Welcome back to the day, Rabbi. What does today's signing ceremony, what does it change in the Middle East?
Oh, I think it's an extraordinary transformation because unlike past and prior peace agreements, and this is all about opportunity, particularly in the realm of economics. This partnership, how many Gulf leaders have expressed to me these past few years that with our resources and wealth and Israel's brain trust and technology, that together we could develop the most powerful economic region in the world. So I believe that economics, is a very strong engine that's driving this process. COVID-19, there needs to be a regional response. The controversy over Israel possibly annexing the West Bank, and the Emiratis and Bahrainians very much rescued a two-state solution here. And of course, you have the existentialist challenge and threat, the ongoing threat coming from Iran and its satellites, that I do believe the Gulf states are looking to Israel to step in and to become its defender and protector. So there were a host of reasons here
Rabbi,
as to why we celebrate this. Yes.
When you and I spoke last month, you said that these agreements are a victory for the Palestinians and that they mean that there will be discussions about a two-state solution. There were no Palestinian representatives at the White House today.
Well, it's no different than the way the Palestinians boycotted the conference in Bahrain last June at the Peace Through Prosperity Conference. There are those of us, including myself, who believe that the road to the Israeli-Palestinian reconciliation must go through economics. And the Gulf states today acknowledge they have skin in the game. They're going to have to bring a sense of economic opportunities, empowerment, and hope to the Palestinian people. That can really be the engine that can bring about this kind of reconciliation.
Israel, with this agreement, has normalized ties with two Arab countries that do not want to answer claims about human rights violations within their own borders. Let me ask you, as a man of faith, what did the Jewish state sacrifice in order to win or to reach new states of normal relations with the UAE and Bahrain?
I don't think the state of Israel sacrificed anything. I've been in the region now for more than 12 years, and I have seen some dramatic improvements on the human rights front in terms of how the different rulers are conducting themselves in terms of their own populations. So I think it's just a journey that's going to continue and grow and develop to the promised land of a genuine, authentic democracy in that region.
Well, as that development takes place, I'm sure we will be talking with you again. We hope so. Rabbi Marc Schneler joining us tonight from Washington, D.C. Rabbi, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Israeli relations with Bahrain and the UAE are already good. Some observers say today's agreement is a de facto confirmation of what has been happening for years. Is there more to the deal in the eyes of Israelis? Our Jerusalem correspondent, Tanya Kramer, takes a look in this report.
The first commercial flight from Tel Aviv to Abu Dhabi. A long isolation period for Israel in the region has ended. Until now, it only has signed peace treaties with Egypt and Jordan. In August, Israel normalized ties with the United Arab Emirates. Bahrain followed a month later, brokered by the US. It signals a change of alliances in the region.
For us, it creates a much stronger Sunni-Israeli alliance against Iran, against the Shiite axis, which is very important if we look at American elections in November. When we have a Democratic candidate that declares that they want to go back to the previous nuclear deal with Iran, such an alliance of Israeli and Sunni nations in the Middle East is extremely important.
What this doesn't solve is Israel's conflict with the Palestinians. The UAE has insisted that Israel suspends its plans to annex parts of the occupied West Bank, at least temporarily. But the deal breaks with the public position of Arab countries to refrain from normalizing relations with Israel until it ends its occupation over millions of Palestinians. In Tel Aviv, the mood among Israelis is mixed as people prepare for a nationwide lockdown. It's excellent. I opened a school for Arabic. I did it to promote peace, and now I think it is even more important. It's only for political interests, for Bibi, for Trump, and also the UAE because of arms and for good relations with the US. They don't really care about us. I think it's more needed to deal with many problems we have here that have to do with the lockdown, corona, and more political problems. The country is very unstable, and there's a lot to take care of before dealing with external issues. The agreements are seen as a huge achievement for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. But as he faces a corruption trial and is under fire for his poor handling of the pandemic, there are also a rare piece of good news.
All right, well, for a different perspective, the view from Europe, I'd like to pull in Christian Hanelt. He's the senior Middle East expert at Germany's Bertelsmann Foundation. Mr. Hanelt, it's good to have you on the day. At the White House today, it was all about Israel, the UAE, Bahrain, and the United States as the broker. Noticeably absent were the Palestinians. What about the Europeans?
The Europeans are not present in this deal-making policy of Trump vis-à-vis the Middle East. Trump has a totally different strategic approach to change new trends in the Middle East. It's without multilateral institutions like the EU. It ignores UN resolutions or international agreements or even the Quartet, which is the mediation mechanism towards the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. With a footnote, Brent, the Hungarian foreign minister was present. That was the footnote, but the EU not.
Okay, that was the European there in the room. What do you make of claims that these deals motivated by fears of Iran, in that the U.S. has torpedoed the Iran nuclear deal, which the EU has tried to save? So today's agreement, it almost comes at the expense of Europe.
Look, Germany has the EU presidency, and in Germany there are three issues vis-à-vis this new trend of the Middle East on the table. The one is the German government is relieved that the hold of annexation of Palestinian territories by the Israeli government has been achieved. They hope that with the UAE especially, that there will be a drive towards Israeli-Palestinian understanding. There is a window of opportunity, what is told here in Berlin. On the other hand, the big concern in Europe is that in the forthcoming running election campaign in the US, that the American-Iranian confrontation could lead to further escalation. Already next Monday, there is again a fight on the United Nations Security Council on the Iranian issue. So that is still an issue of concern.
Is it likely that other countries are going to follow what we've seen today in Saudi Arabia, saying tonight that it is sticking by the plan of the Arab world that first there has to be a resolution to the Palestinian-Israeli problem before any other deals can be made?
There is a paradigm shift since the Arab Peace Initiative from 2002, which said all 22 Arab states to wait for a Palestinian state before normalizing with Israel. This is now changing. More Arab countries would like to go into more strong relations with the US and with Israel. And this is mainly driven by strong economic and technological wishes. You know, especially the countries in the Gulf want to get more innovation. The UAE is very innovative Arab country. They see their economic links much more with the US and with Israel in order to get their country forward. The states in the Gulf region, they can depend less on oil export in the future. They need to look for new business and employment opportunities. And this has these new political trends that is with more cooperation with innovative countries like Israel and the US.
Let me ask you about today's developments, maybe through the eyes of the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. She has said that Israel's security is a central tenet of German policy. Now, when you hear that, I would assume that Berlin must be pleased by the developments today, because these developments are helping to stabilize Israel and its security.
Germany and Europe have, in all recent years, always trying to push more cooperation between Israel and its Arab neighbors, and trying to get the Palestinian issue solved. This always goes together, and we also share the same concerns about the Iranian threat towards Israel and Arab countries in the region. The approach is different. The American approach vis-à-vis the Iranian threat is maximum pressure. And Trump said, you know, when I am re-elected, Iran will come and make a deal with me in 30 days. The Europeans and others at the United Nations Security Council think it has to go with an agreement and controlled by the IAEO in Vienna in order to get Iran back into less escalation in the region.
I've got about half a minute here. I want to ask you, what happens next year when the German Chancellor steps down, when Angela Merkel is no longer in charge? What happens to Europe or Germany and Europe's support for Israel? Any change?
No, there is no change. All governments really led by social democrats or by Greens or by conservative parties, there is a broad understanding about the security of Israel and peace and development in the Middle East. I even observe that there will be more engagement, also driven by Germany and France, to foster modernization and development in the Mediterranean and in the southern neighborhood, and to really get conflicts in the region solved.
All right, Christian Hanold with Germany's Bertelsmann Foundation. Mr. Hanold, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.
It's a pleasure talking to you, Brent.